Okay, hello everyone, and welcome teachers and students. We are glad you have decided to join us virtually for this exciting event today with our friends from the Freedom Forum. My name is Darby Jones, and I oversee educational partnerships with EF Explore America. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Shaban, who oversees loyalty and works closely with teachers from around the country. Before I make the introduction to your featured speaker and educator, Jesse from the Freedom Forum, a few quick reminders. Although we can't see you or hear you, please submit any questions and responses to questions you might have into the Q&A feature during our time together. And Sarah and Jesse will be keeping an eye on that over the course of the next hour. You'll want to switch your screen onto speaker view to focus on who is talking throughout. So now, with great pleasure, I want to introduce Jessie Hollis McCarthy. She is an outreach educator who has been with the Freedom Forum since July 2016. During her time with the education team, she has focused on expanding access to First Amendment education by developing educational content and programs to reach audiences around the world. She has led virtual trainings on 6 continents and is convinced Antarctica will be calling very shortly. Recent conference presentations include The Challenge of Truth, Fact-Finding Historical Heroes at the National Council for History Education, and Detecting Propaganda, Defeating Emotional Manipulation at the National Council for the Social Studies. Prior to joining the education team, Hollis McCarthy worked developing and teaching programming for a variety of museums and historic sites in the DC area. Welcome, Jesse. We're so glad to have you, and I will turn this over to you.
Fantastic. I'm going to be sharing my screen soon. So I want to make sure those are enabled for my commands. I'm not sure I quite can, so I'm going to turn it over to my amazing technical help to sort that. Go for it. I'll do an introduction on what we're going to talk about, and this is perfect timing. Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into how to read campaign media. I don't know if you heard, but there's a presidential election going on this year, and it can be really difficult when you are getting bombarded by commercials and memes on social media. How do you sift through all of that noise to find what's really going on? Now, we're going to be looking at historical and some less historical campaign media items. And if you have a thought or you spot something in the techniques that we're talking about today, you can use the Q&A to share out your ideas. So feel free to put any answers into that box along with questions for me. With that said, I am going to be sharing some historical video reels and video footage from campaign advertisements past. They might be a little staticky, the images might not be the best. I'm going to do the best I can with modern technology, but sometimes history doesn't come through in high definition. So we'll see them in the best form we can. So give me one moment to share my screen. All right, on the campaign trail, decoding the battle for votes. What are we going to be looking at specifically? Well, we're going to jump right in and we are going to look at a historical campaign advertisement. In fact, we're going to look at a very interesting attack ad to see if it would influence our vote. We'll talk about the First Amendment and what it does and doesn't protect when we're dealing with political campaigning. I'll show you 2 different techniques that you can use to read the media that you are seeing produced around any election you encounter. I'm going to be using presidential elections because they tend to leave the most behind because they're so big, but these techniques will show up in everything from your classmate who's running for student council all the way up to the candidates currently running for president. After each technique is introduced, you're going to get a chance to analyze it. And that's where that question and answer box is going to come in. I want to hear your thoughts as well. So, excuse me, as I lose my voice a little bit. The first one we're going to look at together today is this advertisement from about a vice presidential candidate. Now, this is an advertisement about Spiro Agnew, who was running as Richard Nixon's vice presidential candidate. And this was not made by his campaign. This was made by his opponent's campaign to attack him. So now that you know it's an attack ad, as we watch it, I want you to think, would this influence whether you would vote for this person or not? Here is Spiro Agnew's an ad attacking him. Let me make sure I have everything clicked. All right. That was a bit of an interesting advertisement, and I hope you could hear the laughter that we would never want to hear again. Think about the way that advertisement was structured, though, and how it's designed to influence you. See, it starts with this strange and unusual laughter at this candidate's name appearing on television, and it ends with this sort of tone shift. It goes from funny to this really intense cough, and then it says it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. It would be laughable. Well, anyone who reaches the highest levels of the elected system to be a serious candidate, it's not really laughable. They are taking on very serious offices. And this advertisement plays on that, but it's not being particularly nice to Spiro Agnew. Really what it's saying is this would be funny if it wasn't so serious. This person thinks they can run for vice president. Now, Agnew does eventually become Vice President Agnew and is the vice president. So this attack ad didn't dissuade that many people, or not enough people, from voting against him to hurt his ability to become vice president. They ultimately won the election. See, the thing is, in the United States, the First Amendment protects our rights of expression. And we don't give up our free expression rights just because we run for office. Now, we might have limits to them if we step into public office because we become part of the organization, in this case, the government, that the First Amendment protects people from. These 45 words guarantee the freedom of expression for all people in the United States. And it reads as such: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, what is this really saying? When it says Congress, it means the government in any form it takes, whether that is a public school or your senator or your governor. The government will not make any laws that tell you what religion to believe, respecting an establishment, or telling you how to practice your faith. So you can have any religion you want, and you can practice it any way you want. Or you might have no religion at all. That's all protected under the First Amendment. The second part says, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. What that means is there won't be laws passed telling us what we can and can't say or write down. In speech and press, we think about talking or a newspaper, but it's actually a lot of different things. Speech is the clothes we wear. Press might be your blog or your Instagram feed. See, these are the freedoms that govern what we put out into the world, how we express ourselves. Then we see the next one, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. This freedom comes with one clarifying rule: we can gather together peacefully and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We can protest when the government does something we don't like, or protest if they're thinking about changing something we do like. Now, two key things to remember about the First Amendment. One, it only protects you from the government, not anything that's not the government. Yeah, the government can't punish me for saying I don't like my senator, but my friend might get mad at me about it and tell me not to say that. See, my friend doesn't have to protect my freedom of speech. It might not be the nicest thing for them to start yelling at me because they disagree with me, but they're not stepping on my rights. And that's the thing. Private businesses, private organizations, someone's house might have rules. The First Amendment is only protecting the government from punishing you for those things you say or protest. The second thing about the First Amendment to keep in mind is it's not a good idea, bad idea law. It doesn't say we can only say nice things or assemble for nice reasons. It just says, yeah, you can. It's a yes-no law. And for the most part, it's a yes law. There are some exceptions. For example, if I'm elected to government, say I become the mayor of a city, I don't have to give up my religion just because I was an elected official. I might talk about my faith, but I couldn't, as mayor, pass laws or rules in my city making other people follow my faith. For example, some religions follow specific diets. I couldn't pass a law that said everyone had to follow the same diet as I do because of my faith. With freedom of speech in the press, we have the right to say mean things and nice things, true things and false things. If you're seeing an election campaign, there isn't a protection for us to knowingly lie to hurt someone. So if I'm running for the mayor, I can't make up something designed so people won't vote for my opponent. What does that look like? I couldn't say my opponent is mean to puppies. That's not true. I made up just to hurt them. But I could say something like, ugh, my opponent is terrible. Yeah, still not nice, but how do you prove what terrible is? That's sort of an objective thing. It might be exaggerated. It's definitely not nice, but it would be protected because I'm not purposely knowingly lying. Now, if I tell the truth and it hurts their election, that is protected. We also have the right to assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. Well, if we're allowed to assemble for things like, say, a political rally or things like that, why can't we do that right now? If I have assembly, why am I on a webinar instead of in an auditorium with you? Remember, the First Amendment says no when things are harmful. So with speech, I can't tell a lie to hurt someone, and I can't assemble if there is a clear and present danger, like accidentally making people sick or on the edge of a cliff. Not a good place for an assembly unless it was a rock climbing convention. And that's the balance. What that means is we're going to see things in these advertisements that maybe aren't the nicest or maybe aren't the most informative. They're not going to lie, but it won't be information. And you have to remember, we live in a space and a law that protects a lot of things. If you have any questions about the First Amendment, now is the time to put them in the Q&A. I may not see them for a few minutes, but I will definitely try and get to them. When we talk about the First Amendment, we also have to remember that it lets us create a lot of campaign media. In fact, when I say a lot, I mean millions of dollars nowadays in campaign media, but that's not new. See, on the screen, I have about 200 years of campaign media, starting with President number 8, Martin Van Buren, all the way up to, I think the one at the bottom is from a Bernie Sanders campaign. That's a Sanders campaign stop with Eisenhower and Lincoln in the middle. All right, 200 years of presidents. Why on earth are they creating so much campaign media? And that Martin Van Buren one is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, pieces of mass campaign media. So something that was sent to a lot of places. And I do mean literally sent. He mailed it to people. Why are they doing that? What's the point of all this? Look, the most important thing to remember during an election season is all the media that's being put out by a campaign has one goal: to influence voters. See, they might be trying to show themselves as very cool or connected to you, but all this media is not designed to give you information or tell you what the candidate stands for or against. The goal of this is to influence you to vote for them. And they'll do this. They might establish a few things. They might create a campaign vibe so people know who's like-minded. Hey, you and I both like the same candidate? I bet we agree on some stuff. Stand out from the crowd. Hundreds of millions of people literally are eligible to run for president. You have to stand out from that. Think about it. We already have hundreds of people in our highest offices of government when you take in the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches, 3 big branches. That's hundreds alone just for the federal level. Now, some of them aren't eligible because they are already in positions like a Supreme Court justice, but many people who work in the systems of those also will ultimately go on to run for elected office. It might be to establish a platform or vision. What kind of president will you be? And connect with history or historical greats. Why talk about the past? Isn't it over? Well, if you're running for president, no. You're also going to counteract misconceptions. If, say, a candidate's very young, you want to counteract the misconception that you're too young to be president. Or for a president who's maybe older, they might say, look, I'm still fighting fit and ready to hold office. And you want to highlight opponents' weaknesses. This is a big one. It's not just about talking about how fabulous you are as a candidate, but you also have to let people know why your opponent is so terrible for the office. When we look at campaign media, there are 2 techniques we're really going to see happening in it. One is the appeal to our minds. They know that we are smart cookies and they want to tap into that. They're going to use information in tiny selective ways to try and sway us into voting for them. The other side is the dramatic side. This is designed to appeal to our heart, get our feelings involved. When these are put together in creative and artistic ways, they form a really powerful tool of persuasion. But if we know, hey, all campaign media is designed to manipulate us into voting one way or another, and that's the thing, it's marketing a candidate to us, it's trying to sway us one way, we can take apart the techniques. So let's start. The first one we're going to look at are claims. This is information that is carefully chosen about stuff the candidate has done or stuff the candidate plans to do in the future. It might answer questions like, what have they voted for or against, or what have they done or promised to do? Do they support or oppose anything? See, it's not going to give you the whole story. You're not going to get their entire career. They aren't handing you their resume and personal history. What they are saying is, here are a couple key pieces of information that make me look fabulous and my opponent look terrible that I'm going to share with you. Now, what does that look like in reality? Well, let's go back to a particularly unpleasant election in American history. I think that's the nicest way I can put it, particularly unpleasant. And this is between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. It doesn't end well. It ends with accusations that the election has been stolen and that it wasn't legitimate. It was, needless to say, pretty much an ugly fight for this particular election. And here is an attack ad published in a newspaper by John Quincy Adams' campaign. And it's called The Political Primer, or a Horn-book for the Jacksonites. All right. To understand why they're calling it that, you need to know a kind of weird piece of educational history. A political primer or hornbook, those are early textbooks. Think like your first grade textbook. By saying that it's a primer, like a workbook, or a hornbook, it's A hornbook's a piece of wood shaped like a ping pong paddle with a single page of basic educational information. Numbers, the alphabet, normally a picture and a poem. It's called a hornbook because they would soak cow horn in water and use it to laminate it and make it durable. What they're saying though is, remember these very early childhood, these books and stuff you used to learn when you were young? This is information so basic about Andrew Jackson as a candidate that even a 5 or 6-year-old would know this about him. What do they say is the most basic information you need? In this dense wall of text, I want to pull out 2 things. In viewing the history of this extraordinary man, we discover a continued series of the most flagrant transgressions of the 6th commandment. I ask the reader to look for a moment at the history of the war with the Creek Indians, and particularly at the bloody massacre at a place called the Horseshoe. They're not being casual, even if it sounds like they are. They're saying Andrew Jackson has killed people, that he's unfit to be president because during wartime, he committed a very negative and bad act. They're claiming he took place in a massacre. What they're leaving out, though, is that it was actually a battle between combatants in the U.S. Army and members of the Creek Nation, and that it was a skirmish during wartime. No, it doesn't reflect well on Jackson when put this way, but without that bigger context, the understanding that this is from, I believe, the War of 1812, and that this was a moment with combatants who had allied with the British side and the battle was going on. Okay, they didn't make anything up. Andrew Jackson really did this. But taken out of context, it doesn't really give us the information we need about Andrew Jackson. So let's jump forward a little bit in history and take a look at something slightly more recent than Andrew Jackson. This is Jimmy Carter. Now, Carter is running in the first presidential election after Watergate. During Watergate, we see President Nixon resign from the White House in the wake of a series of offenses. It was likely he would have gone to trial and been impeached and ultimately removed from office, so he resigns before that can happen. As a result, people are feeling fairly nervous about politicians, the president, and Washington in general. And so Carter, sensing these feelings in the nation, produces this advertisement. Now, everyone, I would like to hear, and if you want to share out something you notice about how he's using claims, tiny pieces of information, to make you think he's a good candidate in this commercial, get prepared to type those into the question and answer box. Look for things he says, like what kind of politician he is, what experience does he have, what's his job, why does that job make him a good candidate for president? Here we see Carter's ad for his campaign.
You know, everybody from Congress that's running for president is a lawyer. I don't have anything against lawyers. My oldest son is a lawyer. But I think it's time to have a non-lawyer in the White House for a change. Somebody that's had to work with his hands, someone who has had to run a complicated business, somebody who has actually had to manage the affairs of a large government, as I have in my own state.
It makes sense. Vote for Jimmy Carter in the Democratic presidential primary.
All right, everyone. If you want to open up the Q&A box, feel free to type in and share out any claims you notice Carter making. There are the things he said and also things we saw visually in the advertisement. I have it open and I'll be keeping an eye out for your responses. There are some pretty distinct things. He shows himself at work. He appears to be in conjunction with his business. He lets you know where he is. You see a sign at the beginning saying Plains, Georgia. Yeah, And I see someone shared out. He places value on someone who has run a business and used his own hands. Absolutely. You see him at his business using his own hands to do work. And he shows himself very distinctly in a type of work. He says, he shows himself working as a peanut farmer. But is that his job? Shows himself as a peanut farmer. He is showing his hard work. What's his job in there? Anyone catch it? He says, we need someone with experience managing the affairs of a large government, as I have done in my own state. Who's the head of the state government? They're an elected official. He's the governor. He doesn't just come out and say, oh yeah, I'm the governor of the state of Georgia. He puts it in there. He shows himself with running a business and doing all this hard work with his own hands. He also makes a claim about his experience. He says, everyone running for office these days is a lawyer. Does he say, I hate lawyers? I'm not a lawyer, I hate lawyers. Is that what he says? No, not really. Yeah. He says, my son's a lawyer. Oh, I have a family member who's a lawyer, so even though I'm not one, they're still cool. My son's a lawyer. So I'm not like everyone else running for candidate. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have that background. I'm a businessman. I'm your typical Washington politician. I know how to run a business and work with my... Hold on a second. Does this sound familiar to any campaigns you've heard recently? I'm not your typical politician. I'm a businessman. Yeah, sounds a little bit like Donald Trump. And more recently, Michael Bloomberg, when he was running as a Democratic candidate in the primaries. Wait, what? That's a lot of political differences for people to be using the same claim about themselves. Look, some claims are evergreen. And what I mean by that is they never grow old. Portraying yourself as a Washington outsider, saying you're not the typical politician, and citing different experience that you bring to the table is very much part of running for president. Carter wasn't the first one to do this. And since we just watched Carter's advertisement, we know that President Trump wasn't the first one to use this technique. It goes pretty our leaders. So showing yourself as a hard worker, that's a good claim to make. And of course, Carter didn't lie. There's no lies in there. He tells the truth about his work, but he selectively chose those facts. Sort of like Adams' campaign did in the newspaper example, when they picked what they wanted to show us. Which brings us to our second technique. This is content that appeals to the viewer's emotions. This is where the artistic side of campaign advertisements comes in. You're going to look for techniques where they use very descriptive language. Adjectives describing the candidate as, brave and experienced, but their opponent is dishonest and arrogant. You're going to look for symbols, flags, factories, troops, families. There's a reason Carter showed himself as a farmer. Farming has a very strong historical tie in American culture. Think Thomas Jefferson's iconic line, "We should be a nation of small farmers." It goes very back to the founding of our country. Carter didn't just choose to show himself as a farmer, he tied himself back to a piece of American heritage. There also is going to be music. When the candidate is on the screen, the music will be like, wah. When their opponent is on, it will be like the villain has entered in the movie, wah. And direct appeals. I'm working for you. Yes, you, specifically you. Now, we think of campaign advertisements as big things, commercials or really riveting speeches, but they can be small too. And the person sharing those advertisements with the world might be us. take a look at these. These are small pieces of campaign advertising. Most of them are buttons. One is a bumper sticker two are bumper stickers that you can put on your vehicle or wear on your person to show your support for a particular candidate. Now, does anyone notice any techniques that they're using? Maybe the colors involved or the slogans. Are they comparing themselves to someone from the past, or maybe trying to make themselves seem personal to us and letting us call them by a nickname? Feel free to type anything you notice in the question and answer box, any techniques of feelings you see. While I see some stuff coming into the typed area, I'm going to point out my favorite one. I like Ike. Does anyone remember who President Ike is? Eisenhower. This was his iconic slogan. He used his name. I like Ike. I also see two other candidates kind of messing around with their names like Eisenhower did. Right next to Eisenhower, W stands for women, and it says www.georgewbush.com. Now, is Bush saying literally that his middle name is Women and that we should call him George Women Bush? One, no, that would be very unusual. Two, he's saying, hey, I'm playing on my name to make you feel like I'm connected to the issues you care about. And just below him, we see Feel the Burn, Bernie Sanders, where he's playing on his name, Bernie, and how burn, the shortening, sounds like burn, like feel the burn, get engaged. We also see some of the candidates here starting to compare themselves to past candidates. We see Obama with Kennedy, where he's saying, I am asking you to believe. Now, why compare himself to Kennedy? The average age for a president upon first election is 55 and a half years old. And for example, President Johnson in the 60s was exactly 55 and a half years old when he was elected. But several presidents have been in their 40s. The youngest elected was Theodore Roosevelt, but Obama, Kennedy, Roosevelt won, and Bill Clinton were all in their 40s when elected. They were younger. Obama was fairly new and had a fairly short amount of political experience. At least that's how he was portrayed in his election. And so what he did is compare himself to Kennedy, a previous young president from his party. Hey, if you liked Kennedy, he was young and you gave him a chance and it was okay. Give me a chance. It's going to work out. And it didn't just stop with the election. One of the first images Kennedy releases when he becomes president is himself seated at the desk in the Oval Office and his very young son peeking out from under the desk as he plays with his father, now the president, in the Oval Office. One of the first images Obama released when he became president was him with his daughter standing on his feet as they played in the Oval Office. See, the comparisons didn't stop just because he became president. And I see someone else on here comparing himself to a past president. Take a look at Reagan and Trump's campaign slogans. Let's make America great again, says Reagan. Make America great again, says Trump. We see Trump doing the same technique as Obama. Hey, you like Reagan? You'll like me. We have similar focuses in our presidency. Now, how does this play out in a film version? All right, everyone, this has to be one of, if not my favorite advertisement in political campaign history, which may seem a little strange to you when you see the advertisement, but I promise I will explain why. Just like last time, I want you to watch this for techniques being used to evoke an emotional reaction out of us. Look for sound or the people being featured. You're going to hear numbers in this one. Think very carefully about what the numbers do. Are there any iconic images used? Or do the people in the advertisement ask us to do something and are pulling our emotions in? What emotions does it inspire? Basically, think about the artistic techniques, just like when you're watching a film. Is there, scary music or dramatic music to make you feel a certain way? What do you see in it? This is from Johnson's campaign. And President Johnson was running for office during the height of the Cold War. Tension was really high in the United States, and people were very concerned that this Cold War political tensions would become a real war of nuclear bombs. And so during the campaign, Johnson's opponent, who was a man named Goldwater, who was running against him, phrased something in such a way that made it sound like he, Goldwater, if he became president, would start the bombs flying and it would become a real nuclear war. Latching onto that statement by Goldwater, Johnson's campaign produced this advertisement for television. Take a look. What techniques did they use to get our feelings involved?
Stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
All right, a bit dramatic, I will admit. So feel free to open the question and answer box and share out any thoughts you saw for how they were getting our feelings involved. And if anyone is very confused as to why I said this is one of my favorite campaign ads, I will explain after we analyze it. So the box is open for you to share any techniques you saw for feelings getting involved in this one, or techniques they were using to get our feelings involved on this one. And for clarification while you type, the voice you hear at the end is that says, "These are the stakes." That's actually Johnson's voice. So this was made with his consent and he participated in creating this advertisement. You hear him at the end. He makes a very emotionally strong statement. We must love each other or we must die. Oof, those are really bold, strong words that he brings in. We also see some pretty iconic imagery being used in this advertisement. There's a reason that we see a young child featured, and there's a reason why a very iconic image of the mushroom cloud from a nuclear bomb is featured as well. They catch our attention quite easily, and we're familiar with them. The young girl, we have to think, why show a young child and not a picnicking family or a person on their way to work in a city? Well, are children in charge of things now? When will the children of today be the ones in charge of the world? Future. See, the idea of children representing the future, very common in campaign advertising. And you pair the future represented by this young girl next to the big scary destruction of a nuclear bomb. And so you're given with the idea, vote for Johnson or you will destroy your future. But it goes even further in the advertisement. The little girl is counting 1, 2, 3, 4. She's counting up. The nuclear countdown juxtaposes 10, 9, 8, 7. So we've got this up, down, kind of parallel. It's not just coincidence. They didn't just say, okay, she's going to do something cute, and whatever she does, we'll record and put in the ad. They pick something very specific. The future builds us up, war tears us down. And they're putting that in there. There's a couple other things that they zoom in on. There's a reason they zoom in on her eye, the idea that you don't want kids seeing this, right? Vote to avoid kids from seeing this. And we see a couple other things come to play in the advertisement. Serenity, the birds chirping, versus this nuclear countdown. Now, the final note in this is we hear calls to action at the end. Johnson comes in, he says, now these are the stakes to live in a world where we must love each other or we must die. Those are pretty strong stakes. We have two options: to love each other or for all of this to go very, very badly. See, he sets up that divisive moment. You're with us or you're with destruction. And then we hear an announcer come in. You should get out and vote. The stakes are too high for you to stay home. If that doesn't sound familiar, lots and lots of times, especially around November elections, we hear that call. It's too important for you to stay home. Get out and vote. Vote, vote, vote. We're seeing that a lot right now. That's not new either. See, why call on us to vote? Well, something we can personally do. They're pulling our emotions in by saying, hey, you have the power to do this. So this is the first televised attack ad. It's the first television commercial of an attack ad put out by a candidate. And you might think in today's terms that this advertisement ran hundreds and hundreds of times. Everyone saw it. Well, one, there were 3 channels on television when Johnson was running for president, so hundreds would be quite difficult. And 2, it was deemed too controversial at the time to be shown. After one viewing, so it airs once, the networks pull it from circulation and the Johnson campaign follows because showing an adorable little kid getting caught in a nuclear explosion doesn't play well with audiences. But it must have been effective at some level because 1, it endures to this day as an example of campaigning. And 2, Johnson does win the presidency. Now, why is this my favorite advertisement in presidential election ad history? Well, because the little girl you see featured in the advertisement, her parents were very strong Goldwater supporters. They were planning to vote for Johnson's opponent. They didn't know what she was being filmed for when they agreed to the advertisement. Imagine their surprise when she showed up on their television screens. All right. What should you take away from all of this? Well, I just showed you roughly 200 years of presidential campaign advertisements. And I was able to pull techniques and shared slogans and calls and claims from all 200 years of that. What you really should take away in this whole conversation is this. If you make a decision on who to vote for just based on the advertisements, it's a little bit like buying a piece of clothing without trying it on first. You might get lucky. You might know who you are and your beliefs, and you pick the right candidate and the fit is great for you. But you aren't 100% certain when you go in to vote. It's really critical and important in this whole situation to skip the advertisements or use them as jumping off points and dive into the information. What is the candidate's actual record? What are their policies? Have they released a policy plan? If they haven't, what are their previous statements? What have they said they'll support or oppose? You really want to dive into the actual history and actual platform of the candidate. And with that, you also have to be able to take apart what they're saying. Because if you get pulled in by these advertisements, which are designed, mind you, to pull you in, then you should be able to decode them so that you can find your way back out to get the information you need. Voting just from advertisements, it might be a good fit, but you might find that it wasn't the best choice for you after all. Now, we are coming closer to the end of our time together, and I wanted to open it up for any questions, any thoughts you had on the advertisements. I see the question and answer box is open, and I'm happy to answer anything about anything we discussed today. We have a little over 10 minutes. I also think there might be some questions people sent in advance that I would be happy to answer as well. So let me go ahead and open the Q&A box. Please put in any questions you have. And for my team at EF, are there any questions that were sent in advance that you want to throw my way in our last minutes together for me to answer as people type in?
I do have one actually from one of the students. They had asked how being a world traveler can influence these topics and then how their votes play a role in the electoral college.
All right, I'm gonna take those apart in two. One, how can being a world traveler influence your perspective? The thing is, travel is information. Information is power, and power helps you make good decisions. Traveling within your own country or even your own city or across the world gives you unique insights. It forces you to encounter perspectives that are different than your own and makes your ability to take in information broader. See, there's a real value in being able to consume information. And there are classrooms of many different styles, from traditional to the classroom of the world. I think one of the things that's really important, especially for people in the United States, and there are similar countries, though I think the US is a little bit unique in how we've developed as a nation, in that there's a little bit of everywhere, in every culture, in every language, and every belief in the United States. And to know how we got to where we are today, we have to see the world that was poured into us to make us as a nation. So being a world traveler, you learn about other cultures, but it holds up a mirror to your own. And it helps you understand where you came from, so you can make good decisions about where you want the country to go. And then the Electoral College. I think the Electoral College is for America like dynastic conflicts are for other countries with royal families. You're like, wait, you're the Queen's 8th cousin twice removed, but you're the heir to the throne? Huh? That's a little bit like the Electoral College. The idea at its most basic level behind the Electoral College is to make sure that states with smaller populations don't always lose out or have no voice in the federal election. Here's the thing. I live in Washington, D.C., not a state, and there are more people in D.C. than in some of the states. But see, we're just one city. We're super concentrated, and D.C.'s pretty politically similar. Should our votes count more than someone who just happens to live in a more rural area? Is that fair to people living in small towns? So the Electoral College seeks to balance that. I'm not going to say it's without its own challenges. There's two things that are really important to remember in your state, wherever you are voting. One, how many electoral votes does your state get? Two, how are your electoral votes decided? So if you live in a state where the popular vote is who gets all the electoral votes for the state. So if candidate A gets the popular vote in the state and your state has 6 electoral votes, they get all 6. If you live in a state where it's by percentage, all right, we have 10 electoral votes. Candidate A got 70% of the vote and candidate B got 30% of the vote. 7 of our electoral votes go to candidate A, 3 will go to candidate B. That tells you how your state contributes to the ultimate election. And that tells you the power of your vote. Doesn't mean you shouldn't vote depending on which one you're in, but it lets you know the path your vote takes between you and whoever becomes president and how that electoral vote will be counted. I see one came in. Do today's campaigns feature more or less disinformation than those in the past? Oof. Depends on what you mean. Candidate created, party created, or people created? And the answer is we're probably hearing more of it in terms of a tangible record because we're posting things onto social media. And technology means disinformation spreads further and faster than it ever has before. But things being told that aren't true to endorse a candidate, sure, I share them on Twitter instead of leaning across my fence to tell my neighbor, but that doesn't mean people in the past were somehow different humans than we are today. If I am likely to fall for fake news, then my ancestors in years past and people who lived in my home, I live in a 100-year-old house, they are equally likely to fall for fake news. See, humans are humans. So while it may not have spread as fast or been created in as many ways, I can't imagine that somehow we are doing better or worse than people who came before us. Some things to note in this, though. Not every political campaign happened in a period of technological advancement, which means some campaigns landed right in moments when the radio was getting popular, and that influenced the amount of disinformation they would have seen. Or when newspapers started to get photos in them. I'm looking at Theodore Roosevelt as I say that, because he's president right around the time images start to come into newspapers. And that has a really strong play. Technology can influence how people see an election. The iconic example is the Nixon and Kennedy debates. For people who watched on television, relatively new for the time, they said Kennedy won. For those who listened on radio, they said Richard Nixon won. So technology is obvious in that it does influence the way we think about our candidates and our campaigns. And the amount might be different, but I don't know if the impact is very different. I think it's just more access to information. Awesome question. Are there any others? I'm going to take a look at the question box. Feel free to submit them. Or are there any others submitted in advance that I should answer from my friends at EF? I'm going to stop sharing my blank screen.
There was one more question actually from a student that came earlier. They were curious about what happens when you leave certain parts of the ballot blank or unfill portions of it, and if that will affect their vote.
So there are definitely some things that can disqualify your ballot. And some states have procedures in place to say, hey, you sealed your envelope incorrectly, your vote's not in. Some states do not, and it's really different. I always tell people we're called the United States of America, not because it's a fun nickname, but because we are a series of 50 states plus territories in the district that are united with a lot of different laws that form a country together. So every state's going to be a little different and have a slightly different policy. I don't know where you're based, and I'm not an expert in ballots, so I don't want to give you bad information. Here are my recommendations. Type a Google search and you want the most important terms, or it could be a Yahoo or Bing, use a search engine. Type your state, your district, and type in mail-in voting disqualifications if you're mailing in. If you're voting in person, state, district, and then type in ballot disqualifications, leaving sections blank. They'll tell you the policies, and your district will probably have very transparent information. You can also, if nothing else, find your district's phone number to call in and talk to a real person who will give you expert advice on it. That's what I recommend. Normally, there are a lot of resources to help you get in to vote.
Amazing, thank you.
You're welcome. Any last questions? I see we have about 3 minutes left. I want to turn it over to EF to see if you had anything else you wanted to share. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull up where participants can go to find more resources about this.
Awesome.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, from our end, I just want to say thank you. This is such a timely discussion and really helpful information and tools and skills for decoding elections, as we say, but it is such a, not just now, but processing information and skills that you can use throughout life. And as our students grow up and start to become voters and contributors to this process, this is really important for them to consider and take thoughtfully, and will help all of us in the long run make really informed decisions as we start contributing. So thank you. We're so excited that you were here with us, and thank you for all your time and the knowledge that you shared.
Absolutely. And I'm going to very briefly share my screen on my organization's website, which is newsiemed.org. If you want to dive deeper into anything I talked about or revisit one of these campaign ads, or if you really just want to listen to Spiro Agnew laughter on repeat, that video is available here on the website, and it will help you dive deeper. You can get into the election advertisements, but you can also get into what do candidates produce as they're starting to enter the race, or why is it okay for people to have really strong rallies, or, as someone just asked, is the system fair? What does it mean after the election, and what does it look like if you see protests or people questioning the ballots? See, all of this falls under the purview of the First Amendment, and there are resources to help you dive into the questions to help you practice these tools of civic engagement before you get called on to vote for the first time. So feel free to dive in. And with that, that is the end of my information and time. Turning it back over to you.
Jesse, thank you again so much. It was such a pleasure to have you with us today, and so informative, as Sarah said. I just want to remind everybody at home or in their classrooms, if you will stay on, there'll be a short survey that will pop up as soon as we wrap up and press end. But thank you for your time. This was fantastic and so rich and compelling for everybody. So we just appreciate it very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.